I arrived at the Lakeshore Pavilion in Chicago, United States of America, the afternoon air still humming from the traffic along Michigan Avenue. The venue shimmered with gold drapes and crystal chandeliers, every corner whispering wealth. My younger sister, Madison, was marrying a banker named Cole Rivers, and the city seemed to bend around her happiness. Guests in sleek dresses and sharp tuxedos floated through the lobby, champagne glasses clinking like applause. I stood by the marble sign marked seating arrangements, searching for my name. There it was, printed in elegant cursive, Nora Hayes, Table 14. My eyes followed the diagram. Table 14 wasn't near the dance floor, the head table, or even within view of the string quartet. It was shoved behind a pillar near the swinging service doors. Beneath the number, someone had scrawled a glittering word in pink marker, singles. My throat tightened. Of course. Behind me, one of Madison's bridesmaids approached, a tall blonde with a practiced smile. "You look so lovely," she said. "We put you with the fun crowd." "The fun crowd," I repeated. She nodded, adjusting her pearl bracelet. "You know, the ones who haven't been caught yet." Then she winked and drifted away. I forced a smile, collected my glass of sparkling water, and walked toward my assigned table. The linens were crisp, the centerpiece extravagant, white orchids arranged to appear casual, but costing at least $500. I traced the edge of my napkin, trying to ignore the laughter spilling from table 1, where my parents, Patricia and Henry, sat with Madison and Cole. My mother sparkled in silver satin, her smile sharp enough to slice through the air. My father, ever the businessman, leaned back in his chair, proud as a man who had built the world himself. I'd thought I'd grown past caring what they thought. I was 32, owned a small craftsman house in Oak Park worth about $620,000, and worked as a design instructor at a community college. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Still, being seated behind a pillar had a way of shrinking a person. The ceremony had ended hours earlier under an arch of roses. Madison's gown glimmered like frost as she vowed forever to a man whose ring cost more than my car. I'd clapped with everyone else. I'd swallowed my pride when she walked past, radiating that smug perfection she'd practiced since childhood. The golden child, my grandmother used to call her. I'd been the sensible one. The one who fixed things, who paid her own bills, who stayed single because she wouldn't settle for cruelty disguised as love. Dinner began. The waiters moved in synchronized silence, serving salad drizzled with something too expensive to pronounce. The guests at my table, mostly distant cousins and friends of friends, made small talk about their engagements and vacations. I smiled when required. When the microphone squealed, everyone turned toward the front. Madison stood with her glass raised, her new husband's arm around her waist. "I want to thank everyone for coming," she began, her voice soft but commanding. "And especially my big sister, Nora, who's always been there for me." I smiled faintly, waiting for her to move on. She didn't. "She's still searching for her perfect match," Madison continued, eyes gleaming. "If anyone brave enough to apply is in the room, please see me after the speeches." Laughter erupted. A few heads turned toward me. My stomach twisted. I stared at the condensation running down my water glass. My mother's laugh joined the rest, bright and rehearsed. My father gave a polite chuckle, as if it were all in good fun. That was the moment something in me snapped. I pushed my chair back quietly, the scrape lost under applause. I could leave. My car was parked just outside the valet circle. No one would miss me. No one ever did. As I reached for my purse, a low voice brushed my ear. "There you are." I was beginning to think you'd vanished. I froze. A man stood behind me, tall and composed, his tie midnight blue. He had the kind of face that carried calm like a secret. "Play along," he whispered. "If you want to." I hesitated. Then, for reasons I still can't explain, I nodded. He smiled and slid into the empty chair beside me. "Daniel Carter," he said clearly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Sorry, I'm late, Nora." Traffic on Lakeshore Drive was a nightmare. A hum rippled across the room. Heads turned. The bridesmaids stopped whispering. Madison's glass hovered in midair. "Oh," she said finally, her voice cracking just slightly. You made it. I wouldn't miss it, Daniel replied smoothly, resting his hand near mine, but not touching. His voice carried warmth without arrogance. Your sister's been telling me about this for weeks. Madison blinked. Has she? He nodded. She said it would be beautiful, and it is. Silence stretched thin across the tables before conversation awkwardly resumed. Daniel leaned close enough for only me to hear. I hope that wasn't too much. I chuckled, more from disbelief than humor. Who are you? Someone who doesn't like seeing people humiliated in public. His eyes flicked toward my sister. Let's give them a little something to talk about. For the rest of dinner, he played the role with remarkable ease. He asked about my work, my house, my cat, and my favorite coffee shop. When he listened, he really listened. Now and then, I caught glimpses of confusion from guests who had once looked at me with pity. Now they studied us, whispering behind napkins. Madison avoided our table after that. My parents exchanged looks I couldn't quite read, part suspicion, part discomfort. The humiliation that had burned through me minutes earlier cooled into something steadier, quiet satisfaction. As the music swelled and couples drifted to the dance floor, Daniel turned to me. You're not invisible, he said simply. You just walked into the wrong room filled with people who forgot how to see. His words landed softly, but stayed sharp in my mind. For the first time that night, I didn't feel small. The chandelier light shimmered against his cufflinks. My sister's laughter rang faintly from the far side of the ballroom, but I barely heard it. Daniel extended a hand. Dance? I hesitated, then smiled. Why not? As we stepped into the light, the whispers shifted again. No longer mocking, just curious. I wasn't the lonely sister at the reject table anymore. I was the woman everyone suddenly wanted to understand. And that was the beginning of how everything changed. Daniel's laughter carried just enough ease to draw nearby tables into its orbit. He had that rare kind of presence, quiet yet magnetic. While others at the reception performed for attention, he simply existed, and somehow the room bent toward him. When he mentioned getting lost in the hotel garage, the guests at our neighboring tables leaned in, amused by his tone more than his words. The waiter approached with another bottle of champagne, the expensive French kind my family always ordered when they wanted to prove something. Daniel caught the waiter's eye and requested 2 glasses instead of 1. He poured mine first, handed it with a small nod, and raised his own. To kindness, he said, his gaze steady. Then lower, so only I heard, and to people who show up. Something inside me softened. I took a sip, the bubbles sharp and bright, and tried to mask my shaking hands. For years, I'd endured these family performances alone. Birthdays, holidays, endless dinners where success was measured in cars and vacations. Yet here was this stranger turning humiliation into calm theater. He asked about my work, and I found myself talking more freely than I expected. I told him I was revising a course on typography and identity at the community college. I described how my students, most juggling 2 jobs, brought raw honesty into their designs. Daniel listened like every word mattered. He asked how long I'd lived in Oak Park, and I told him about my little craftsman house, the one with the porch I painted sage green last spring. Cost me $900 in paint and supplies, I said with a laugh. And 3 days of cursing at the weather. He chuckled. Worth every penny, I bet. Houses tell stories. You just have to know how to read them. His words lingered longer than they should have. Across the room, Madison noticed the shift. She excused herself from her cluster of bridesmaids and approached, her gown glittering like it had swallowed the ballroom light. I didn't know you were seeing someone, she said, voice sugar-sweet with a blade underneath. Daniel turned smoothly. We met at a lecture on urban design, he said. Best 90 minutes of my year. Madison's smile wavered. Is that so? He nodded. Your sister's insights were unforgettable. She blinked, not sure if she'd been complimented or outmaneuvered. Well, that's nice. Enjoy yourselves. Then she drifted back toward her table, her posture a little too stiff. Dinner arrived, seared salmon, buttered asparagus, truffle risotto. The kind of meal that costs more per plate than my monthly grocery bill. I watched as the servers glided between tables, the sound of crystal and silver clinking under the music. In my head, I calculated numbers the way I always did when nervous. With the decor, catering, and open bar, the reception had to cost at least $45,000. I respected money when it came from effort, not from performance. As speeches began, Madison's new husband praised family unity, while my parents dabbed their eyes, ignoring the irony. I focused instead on Daniel's steady breathing beside me. He carried calm like a pocket watch, timeless, deliberate, reassuring. When the bouquet toss started, Madison's grin returned. She turned her back to the crowd and tossed the flowers high, aimed directly at me. I didn't move. The bouquet landed awkwardly near my chair, petals scattering. Daniel glanced at it, then at me. "Want to get some air?" "Yes," I said, leaving the bouquet untouched. We slipped onto the balcony. The city stretched in silver light beyond the glass. The lake wind brushed against my hair, cool and honest. For the first time that evening, I could breathe without watching my reflection in anyone's judgment. "Your sister put a target on you," Daniel said quietly, leaning against the railing. Some people forget that kindness costs less than a centerpiece. I looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Why help me?" He paused. "Because I've sat at that table too. Not the same one, maybe, but the kind where people measure your worth by what they can mock." He turned toward me. Sometimes all it takes to stop that is someone willing to stand beside you. Something about his tone carried the weight of truth. Maybe he knew what it felt like to be the outsider, the sibling who never fit the mold. Below us, the lake glimmered in moonlight. The band inside shifted to a slow song, one of those timeless classics that make even cynics believe in second chances. When we stepped back into the ballroom, the temperature of the room had changed. My place card now faced the aisle, as if someone had turned it deliberately. The word singles, written in glitter, had a line drawn cleanly through it. I didn't ask who did it, though I suspected the man walking quietly at my side. The whispers had cooled. Instead of pity, curiosity filled the air. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years stopped by to say hello. An uncle asked about my house. I told him a realtor had valued it at $640,000 last fall. He whistled softly, impressed. For the first time in memory, people actually listened when I spoke. As the night stretched on, the dance floor glowed beneath fairy lights. Daniel and I didn't dance again, but every time I glanced up, I caught Madison's uncertain eyes flicking toward us. Her laughter was quieter now, forced at the edges. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The shift was subtle but complete. The same crowd that had laughed at me an hour earlier now watched with fascination. The story had changed, and I hadn't lifted a finger. Before leaving, Daniel and I lingered by the fountain outside. The hotel lights painted ripples across the water. I slipped off my heels and let the stone cool my feet. "Thank you," I said finally. "You didn't have to do that." He smiled. "Maybe not. But sometimes people need a witness to remind them who they are." "Who are you really?" I asked. He tilted his head, amused. "Someone you'll probably see again." He walked me to my car, the night air carrying the faint scent of lilacs. I started the engine, but before driving away, I looked back at the hotel doors. Madison stood inside, framed by gold light, watching me with something I hadn't seen before, doubt. For years, she'd controlled the story. The perfect daughter, the successful sister, the one with everything. But that night, in a room filled with chandeliers and shallow laughter, the power quietly flipped. I drove home smiling, the city glowing behind me, unaware that a stranger's kindness had just rewritten the first page of a new chapter in my life. 2 weeks after the wedding, life had settled into its familiar rhythm again, or so it seemed. Chicago's winter air had sharpened, the city's skyline drawn in crisp lines against a cold, pewter sky. I'd almost convinced myself that what happened at the wedding was just an odd, magical interruption, a strange act of kindness from a man I barely knew. But Daniel didn't disappear. He called one evening as I was grading design portfolios at my kitchen table, papers spread like a collage of half-dreams and effort. "There's a jazz place on North Clark Street," he said. "Low lights, good sound, no pretense. Come with me." That Friday night, I found myself in a booth beneath a flickering candle, the kind that melted unevenly and left soft rivers of wax. Daniel ordered a bourbon neat. I asked for tea with lemon. When the band began to play, their saxophone whispered through the air like a secret, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen without performance. We talked about everything ordinary, how he never threw away movie ticket stubs, how I kept old paint samples for the walls I might never repaint. He told me he grew up in Columbus, worked as a systems architect for a hospital network, and had once turned down a job in New York because it sounded impressive but felt hollow. He made good money, $180,000 a year, he admitted with a quiet shrug, but kept the same leather wallet he'd bought in college. That steadiness drew me in. Over the next few months, Daniel and I built something that didn't need announcing. He learned the creak on my third stair, the way my back door stuck during rain, and the exact spot where my cat, Juniper, demanded attention every morning. He replaced the faulty porch bulb without being asked. I learned he kept a notebook of single sentences, thoughts, ideas, half poems. When I asked why, he said, "It helps me remember the way moments sound." By March, snow had melted into soft gray slush. Spring arrived in hesitant bursts of sunlight. One morning, Daniel asked if I wanted to see a townhouse listing in Lincoln Square. "Just a look," he said. "Curiosity's free." The place stood on a quiet, tree-lined street, brick warm in the sun. Inside, the wood floors glowed honey gold. The real estate agent, a woman named Claire, mentioned that the sellers were relocating to Boston and might accept an offer around $985,000. I stood in the living room, picturing a life that seemed just a little too big for me. Window plants, morning coffee with soft jazz, quiet laughter echoing through walls that were finally mine. Daniel's hand brushed mine. "You're thinking of paint colors already," he teased. I smiled. "Always." We didn't buy it, not then. Instead, we went back to my house, ate tomato soup at the kitchen table, and talked about the ways people measure wealth, some with bank accounts, others with peace. By the time the new year approached, Daniel had become part of my daily landscape. My parents pretended not to notice, though I saw the curiosity flicker in their eyes when I mentioned him. When Madison sent her annual invitation for the family's New Year's dinner, I almost declined. But Daniel squeezed my hand and said, "Let's go. People who cause storms shouldn't be allowed to think they control the weather." The dinner took place at my parents' house in Evanston, one of those sprawling suburban homes that smelled like old perfume and polished ambition. The table gleamed under the light, set for 20. Madison was radiant, wearing pearl earrings and her usual confidence, the kind built on the illusion that everything revolved around her. I wore a simple black dress, the one I'd bought for $95, and mended it myself when the seam tore. When Madison saw me arrive with Daniel, her eyebrows lifted just enough to betray surprise. Throughout the evening, Daniel spoke with quiet grace. He complimented my father's choice of wine and listened intently to my mother's stories about their recent trip to Maine. He made everyone comfortable, except Madison. She couldn't quite find her footing around him. At one point, she leaned across the table with that same smirk from the wedding. "You waited a long time to bring someone home, Nora," she said. "I was starting to think you preferred your solitude." Daniel didn't flinch. He simply smiled. "Sometimes people wait because they're building a life with care. Your sister's home shows more character and thought than most architects I know." The silence that followed was beautiful. My father cleared his throat. My mother looked down at her napkin. Madison's smile slipped, replaced by something almost human uncertainty. After dinner, Daniel and I walked back through the quiet streets. The snow crunched under our boots, the air sharp with cinnamon and cold. My heart felt strangely light, like something heavy had finally been lifted. On my porch, under the lantern I'd splurged on last fall, a $500 indulgence I justified as necessary ambience, Daniel stopped. "I don't need to pretend anymore," he said softly. Before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple and bright, a classic oval diamond on a thin gold band that caught the porch light. "I paid $18,500 for it," he said, eyes steady. "You once told me you liked the truth more than surprises. I'd have picked a $500 ring, if that's what you wanted. The price doesn't matter. The promise does." The world tilted. The streetlight painted silver across the snow, the hum of the city distant but alive. "Yes," I whispered. The word came out trembling, then stronger. "Yes." He slipped the ring on my finger. Somewhere down the block, a radio played an old love song, one of those timeless melodies that carried warmth through winter air. The porch light flickered, steadying again as if it understood what had changed. For the first time, I felt no need to shrink or hide. Not behind humor, not behind humility. The girl who had once been seated at the corner table, the reject table, had walked out of the shadows and into her own story. As Daniel pulled me close, his breath warm against the cold, I realized that revenge hadn't been the victory. Dignity had. Confidence had. Love, unexpected and real, had rewritten everything. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across my bedspread, the diamond glinting faintly in the light. I made coffee, fed Juniper, and looked out toward the frozen street. The world outside was quiet, but inside me, everything had begun to move. Our engagement party took place exactly 1 year after that unforgettable wedding night. This time, the invitations bore my handwriting, my tone, my control. The Lakeshore Pavilion shimmered again in gold and silver, but the energy in the room was entirely different. I had rented the smaller ballroom, the one with tall windows that faced the lake, where the sunlight dipped across the waves in quiet grace. The contract totaled $8,700, paid with a card that bore only my name. Signing it felt like a full circle. The same building that once caged me in humiliation now opened its doors in acknowledgement. When Daniel and I entered, the crowd turned, their applause genuine. My dress was ivory silk that flowed without effort. I'd bought it myself for $800, no designer label, but the fit was perfect. There were no glitter pens on the tables, no singles section, no pity disguised as humor. Every guest, friend, cousin, colleague, sat where laughter and warmth could flow freely. I designed the seating chart myself and had taken more care with it than I'd ever taken with a professional project. My parents stood near the bar, both dressed impeccably yet visibly uneasy. My mother's smile, always practiced, faltered when she met my eyes. My father gave Daniel a handshake that lingered a little too long, the kind of gesture meant to measure. He didn't find what he was looking for. Madison arrived late, her husband Cole trailing behind her with a polite grin that couldn't mask exhaustion. Her gown shimmered in pale gold, but her glow had dimmed since the wedding. Life, it seemed, had started teaching her lessons money couldn't cushion. The night unfolded in easy harmony. Daniel moved through the crowd like light itself, calm, warm, impossible to ignore. People gravitated to him, not because he demanded attention, but because he offered comfort. I caught my parents watching him, their earlier skepticism softening into something closer to respect. When it came time for toasts, I took the microphone first. The air grew still, expectant. I thanked the staff by name, my voice steady. "To Olivia," I said, nodding toward my friend who once helped me repaint my porch. "To Marcus, my neighbor who fixed my broken gate for nothing more than a plate of cookies. To Daniel, who taught me that the smallest act of kindness can change the shape of an entire story." The room hushed, everyone listening. A year ago, I stood in this same place feeling invisible. Tonight I stand here seen. Life has a strange way of folding pain into purpose. Applause filled the air. I saw Madison's eyes glisten for just a second before she quickly looked down. Then Daniel took the microphone. "I'll only add one thing," he said with that calm authority that drew attention without effort. "You never truly measure a person by the table they're seated at, but by how they rise from it." The woman beside me, she didn't just stand up. She built her own table. The applause that followed was different this time. warmer, deeper, sincere. He didn't mention how he had once stepped into fiction to protect me. He didn't have to. Every person in that room knew. Later that night, when most guests had gone and soft music still played, Madison approached me near the window overlooking the dark water. Her hands trembled slightly around her glass. "I was unkind," she said. "I thought it was funny. But it wasn't." Her words came slowly, as if dragged through years of habit. For a moment, I almost saw the sister I'd loved before our lives split into competition. "I accept that," I said quietly. "But I can't go back to how things were. I'm building something else now, something honest." She nodded, eyes wet. It was the first real moment of humility I'd seen in her. And though I didn't forgive everything, I felt a peace I hadn't expected. Daniel and I were married a few months later in a brick church in Lincoln Square. The ceremony was small, just 50 people, no extravagance. My bouquet, bought from the corner florist for $60, was simple and beautiful. After the vows, we drove past my little craftsman house, windows glowing with warmth. Juniper watched us from the window, tail flicking against the glass. We waved like fools, laughing until tears blurred the streetlights. 2 months later, we made an offer on a 2-bedroom condo with light that spilled across every wall. $495,000. The seller accepted within a day. We decided to keep my old house and rent it to a schoolteacher named Grace. She paid $1,800 a month and treated the place as if it were her own. When she moved in, she brought a plant in a blue ceramic pot. "For good energy," she said. It sat on the porch where I once stood feeling small. That fall, we hosted our first Thanksgiving dinner. Both families came, my parents, Madison and Cole, and Daniel's quiet and kind mother from Ohio. I set the table myself, with linen I'd ironed the night before and plates I'd found at a thrift store for $32. Madison arrived early to help arrange flowers. There was no tension, no cruelty, only the soft murmur of conversation. My parents brought a pie that, for the first time, tasted less like presentation and more like an apology. When Daniel lifted his glass to thank everyone for coming, the moment felt sacred. "To the people who stayed," he said. "To the ones who learned, and to the ones who taught us how to start again." Everyone raised their glasses. The air was full of forgiveness, without needing words. As the night wound down, I looked around our dining room, the laughter, the candles, the scent of roasted herbs, and I realized something profound. Life had locked me into a corner once, but I had found the door. Sometimes, the tables we're pushed to aren't punishments. They're beginnings. Sometimes, a stranger's kindness opens the first crack of light. Months later, I stood in my kitchen on a quiet morning, sunlight spilling across the marble counter. My ring caught the light, scattering tiny stars across the wall. Daniel hummed from the next room, coffee brewing. I thought about the girl who had once felt so small she could vanish behind a pillar, and I smiled. My sister had watched me rise. My parents had seen me thrive. But most importantly, I had learned to see myself clearly, without waiting for anyone's permission. This is my story. It began in cruelty, but it ends in grace. Money built comfort, truth built freedom, and love built everything else. So, if anyone ever seats you at the corner table and calls it a joke, smile. Look toward the balcony. The air there is clearer, the view wider, and the story waiting for you is far better than the one they wrote.